At 9:52 a.m. on the 18th of June, 2025, the USS Princeton fired a warning salvo. 5 rounds of 5-inch naval gunfire screamed into the sea, just 200 meters off the bow of a Chinese destroyer accelerating toward the American carrier group. For 29 minutes prior, Beijing's warships had tightened the noose. A-052D destroyer at full speed, a Type 039 submarine surfacing inside torpedo range, and J-15 fighters screaming south from the Shandong. And then it happened: the Chinese radar locked onto the USS Nimitz with fire control precision. It was no longer a game of shadowboxing. In a theater packed with $300 billion in daily global trade, the U.S. Navy's rules of engagement flipped in an instant. What followed was a tactical escalation so calculated and so dangerously close to real war that it's still being reviewed behind closed doors in Washington. So what made the U.S. fire first? And how did that single warning shot trigger a full-spectrum American response Beijing never saw coming? At 9:21 a.m. on the 18th of June, 2025, the USS Princeton's SPY-1D radar picked up a sharp, accelerating contact 213 kilometers southeast of Luzon. Within 90 seconds, the trace was confirmed. A Chinese Type 052D destroyer, hull number 173 Jianyang, had jumped from 18 to 30 knots, closing the gap fast. Inside Princeton's Combat Information Center, red lights flicked on. Threat posture elevated. The destroyer wasn't broadcasting identification, wasn't on a recognized exercise path, and wasn't slowing down. At 9:26, its vector would breach the U.S. Carrier Strike Group's defensive envelope in less than 14 minutes. No radio hails, no course change, and then came the lock. At 9:28, Jianyang's Type 346 ampere phased array radar shifted modes from surveillance to fire control. For 12 gut-tightening seconds, electromagnetic waves painted the USS Nimitz with the unmistakable signature of weapons targeting. Not probing, aiming. That was the line. The captain of the Princeton gave the order. Fire warning shot, grid echo 2. 5-5-inch rounds exploded from the Mk-45 naval gun, smashing into the sea 200 meters ahead of the Chinese destroyer's bow, not to damage, but to signal, "This ends now." Silence followed for exactly 17 seconds. Then a new contact appeared. A radar return at 25,000 feet. E-2D Hawkeye operators called it. In 4 J-15 fighters, airborne from the Shandong, heading south at full throttle. By 9:31, the Princeton's CIC went to general quarters. The carrier group's defensive network lit up. Every Arleigh Burke-class destroyer adjusted position. The USS Nimitz locked down its flight deck and rerouted incoming aircraft to launch positions. The Pacific hadn't seen this level of tension since the Cold War, and it was far from over. At 9:33 a.m., 4 J-15 multi-role fighters launched from the deck of the Chinese carrier Shandong. The twin-engine jets climbed aggressively, straining against the physics of their own launch system, a ski jump deck designed for show, not sustained combat. From 180 nautical miles away, the USS Princeton's combat team was already watching. The E-2D Hawkeye, orbiting at 25,000 feet, had tagged all 4 jets instantly. They weren't alone. More heat signatures followed a second wave of J-15 second, climbing harder, burning fuel faster. What they did realize was how exposed they already were. Each FA-18E Super Hornet aboard the USS Nimitz was networked through Link 16, a combat data sharing protocol that turns individual fighters into a collective brain. The J-15 second, they relied on voice radio and individual radar scopes. Their pilots saw with their own eyes. American pilots saw with everyone's bullyings. At 9:38, the USS Nimitz initiated ramp sweep protocol. Within 2 minutes, steam launched the first Super Hornets into the sky, catapulted with full combat loads, air-to-air missiles armed, electronic warfare modules online. Above 15,000 feet, the technological mismatch was immediate. The J-15 second mechanically scanned radars swept back and forth like lighthouses in the fog, broadcasting their positions. In contrast, the American fighters used APG-79 AESA radars tracking multiple targets simultaneously, passively, invisibly. The Chinese formation tightened. Without data links, they had no choice but to fly in visual range of each other, making them easy to track, easier to predict, and impossible to maneuver freely. Their design looked modern, Their tactics looked like 1,987. As they reached 22,000 feet, something unexpected happened. Their climb stalled. The ski jump launch had forced them to carry less fuel and fewer weapons. They were burning energy to stay airborne, not to fight. Meanwhile, the Growlers were just getting started. While American fighters danced overhead, a quieter threat crept in below. At 9:41 a.m., sonar operators aboard the USS Princeton detected a submerged contact 72 nautical miles to the southwest. The acoustic profile was unmistakable. A Chinese Type 039 diesel, electric submarine moving slow, hugging the thermocline, masking behind the ocean's natural noise. But there was a problem for the Chinese. The sub was loud, not reckless, but not silent. The Princeton's AN/SQQ-89 sonar suite had been tracking its acoustic footprint for nearly an hour. Each propeller rotation, each cavitation bubble, all logged. Then it made its move. At 9:45, the contact began to close the distance. Range, 18,000 yards. Course, intercept vector toward the carrier group's southern flank. By 9:47, it surfaced, briefly raising its snorkel to recharge batteries. A fatal mistake. Contact, subsurface, grid delta 7, probable type 039. Snorkel up. Came the call over Princeton's internal net. The bridge went silent. Everyone understood the implications. A diesel sub this close to a carrier group wasn't passive reconnaissance. It was positioning. It was baiting. It was a threat. The USS Princeton did not hesitate. Within seconds, a triple burst of sonar pings confirmed the sub's position. Depth, range, bearing. On the tactical display, the fire control solution for the RUM-139C VL ASROC, a rocket-propelled anti-submarine torpedo, was greenlit, but the order to fire didn't come. Instead, the Princeton transmitted a narrowband sonar, SNAP, a high-energy acoustic pulse aimed directly at the submarine's hull. It didn't damage anything, but to the sub's sonar room, it would have sounded like an underwater explosion. It was a message: "We see you. We can end this. Back off." 2 minutes later, the contact turned hard south, depth increasing, signature fading. The hunter had become the hunted, and the Chinese surface fleet still didn't know an American attack submarine was already behind them. At 9:51 a.m., with Chinese fighters pressing in and a submarine fleeing south, the USS Nimitz made its move. The order was crisp. Launch full strike group. Authorize Growler package. The sky above the Philippine Sea erupted. In under 3 minutes, 16 farad per ampere 18E Super Hornets, 4 EA 18-gram Growlers, and 2 E-2D Hawkeyes were airborne, a full-spectrum American response. The kind of operation that only a U.S. supercarrier could execute with such speed and precision. The Growlers moved first. Flying at 25,000 feet, they activated their ALQ-99 jamming pods and lit up the electromagnetic spectrum like a Christmas tree. Within seconds, Chinese radar screens aboard Shandong and Jianyang turned chaotic. Blips appeared, vanished, multiplied, fused. False targets flooded their scopes. J-15 pilots, already burning fuel from their aggressive climbs, now faced ghosts in the sky. Where they saw 4 American fighters, there were 12. Where they tried to lock a target, the radar lock slipped away like smoke. This wasn't combat. This was psychological warfare through electrons. At 9:55 a.m., the FA-18 second executed a tactical spread known as the Wall, a layered, overlapping engagement formation with high, medium, and low elements. Each element covered the others. Each fighter carried AIM-120D AMRAAMs with ranges exceeding 160 kilometers, and every one of them was locked into the same real-time battlespace picture. The J-15 second had no such advantage. Lacking secure data link capability, they were flying blind, communicating with voice radio, struggling to maintain visual cohesion. In a modern engagement, they were outclassed before a single missile flew. By 9:57, the American wall had sealed shut. The Chinese fighters were now boxed in. Their options were limited: push forward and enter overlapping kill zones, break formation and expose themselves to side attacks, turn back and admit defeat. They chose the worst of the three. They hesitated. At exactly 10:03 a.m., the Chinese strike group experienced something it wasn't prepared for: silence shattered by shock. 6 nautical miles off the port side of the Shandong, a black fin broke the surface. A second later, The full silhouette of a Virginia-class attack submarine emerged from the deep, slicing through the water like a blade through silk. No announcement, no warning, just presence. For the Chinese lookouts on deck, it was a moment of dread. Naval doctrine calls this maneuver an emergency surface for effect, a tactic rarely used, but always remembered. The submarine had been stalking the entire formation for days, undetected, and now chose to reveal itself within visual range. It was no accident. Cameras aboard Shandong captured everything water cascading off the hull. The sail tower emblazoned with the American flag. The silent stare of a machine built to end wars before they begin. The message was crystal clear. You're not hunting us. We've been with you all along. Aboard the USS Princeton, sonar teams confirmed it. USS Missouri, a Block 4 Virginia-class boat, had maneuvered into optimal torpedo range 36 hours earlier. She held that position without detection until this precise moment, surfacing as a signal, not a threat. But make no mistake, the threat was real. With 4 torpedo tubes locked, 12 Tomahawk cruise missiles on board, and the ability to dive again in under 90 seconds, Missouri represented a nightmare scenario for any surface fleet. At 10:05 a.m., she submerged once more, disappearing into the depths like a shadow fading from memory. For the Chinese command center, the psychological blow was devastating. They were outgunned, outflanked, and now outclassed beneath the surface too. In less than 15 minutes, the entire concept of their operation had unraveled. At 10:07 a.m., aboard the USS Nimitz, the strike group commander made the final call. Hold position. Do not pursue. Broadcast tactical dominance. The decision wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. The Chinese forces had been decisively contained. Any further aggression would trigger a kinetic response. But now, the point had been made. Within minutes, encrypted communications pulsed across the Pacific. In Guam, U.S. Pacific Command flagged the incident as Tier 1 escalation. In Okinawa, F-35Bs were placed on alert. And in Manila, the Filipino Navy activated joint surveillance protocols, silently moving 2 offshore patrol vessels into forward posture. But the real reaction came from Washington. At 10:19 a.m. Eastern Time, the White House Situation Room received a full sitrep. National Security Advisor Lauren Kent, flanked by intelligence leads and a Pentagon liaison, reviewed the sequence frame by frame. Her summary was crisp. They lit us up. We warned them. They blinked. Back in Tokyo, Japanese news outlets broke the story within the hour. Chinese radar locked on U.S. carrier in Philippine waters. It sent shockwaves across Japanese parliament chambers. By 11 a.m., Prime Minister Shinozaki issued a formal statement of support. The presence of the U.S. Navy in the Western Pacific ensures peace, not provocation. In Canberra, Australian defense officials quietly greenlit a 6-month extension of their joint naval exercises with the U.S. 7th Fleet. In Seoul, South Korean analysts called it a wake-up call for regional air superiority. Even in Hanoi, normally cautious state media referenced the reckless use of radar by non-allied naval forces, a thinly veiled rebuke of Beijing. The message was spreading fast, but while allies moved to signal unity, the real question emerged behind closed doors. What was Beijing trying to achieve, and why did they back off at the last second? By 10:23 a.m., the Chinese J-15 second began to peel off one by one. Fuel gauges near critical. Radar still jammed. Formation broken. At 10:30, the Shandong carrier strike group turned northeast, broadcasting the message, "End of scheduled maneuvers." But no one believed it. Across the Indo-Pacific, military analysts saw it for what it was: a tactical withdrawal wrapped in diplomatic theater. The Chinese had attempted a high-pressure intercept and failed. They didn't lose ships, but they lost something harder to rebuild: credibility. In Washington, defense circles began to brief what they called the Luzon Lesson, a study in layered deterrence. One official put it bluntly: "We didn't fire a missile, but we hit them harder than they expected, electronically, tactically, psychologically." For Beijing, the cost was steep. Their most advanced destroyer was neutralized by American radar coordination and naval gunfire precision. Their fighter fleet had been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and electronically dismantled. Their submarine had been tracked, classified, and humiliated, forced to flee under sonar pressure. But most damaging, their entire strike group was shadowed by a U.S. submarine for 8 days without detection, culminating in a surface maneuver visible to the world. By 12 p.m. local time, satellite imagery of the Virginia-class surfacing maneuver went viral, featured on international broadcasts with the caption, "We were always here." The Philippine government, under diplomatic pressure from both powers, issued a neutral statement, but behind closed doors, Manila reactivated discussions for deeper U.S. naval access to Subic Bay. What began as a bold maneuver ended as a strategic embarrassment. What does this confrontation mean for the next flashpoint, the waters off Taiwan, or the first island chain? If you believe strength prevents war and clarity prevents chaos, don't stay silent. Like, comment, and subscribe to stay locked on future missions.